All right, I'm recording, and by way of very small introduction, everyone, I would like to welcome Monica Escamilla to this artist visit. Thank you, Monica, for showing up. Uh,
Sure.
I first met Monica at Virginia Commonwealth University, right? That's where we first met.
Yeah.
We're both in the photo program, and then later on had the chance to work with you and part of a video production team, and just sort of have been watching your photography career. I really like the outcome of your professional photography and what you share on Instagram, like the way you use colors, the way you interact with the models. And then I don't know how much, I guess you'll probably go into this, but kind of like, it seems like the rapport that you build with your models, everything seems so like natural and airy and friendly. Like I look at your work and I wish that like I could be on that set. Like, oh man, looks like a lot of fun. um,
Thank you.
but anyways, so I'm delighted to have you here. I'm personally excited to like just hear more about how you work and how you got there. So I'm gonna turn it over to you. I'll let you talk for about 40 minutes, and then I'll stop and see if anyone has questions.
Okay, cool. Okay, so, obviously a lot of you're all non-majors, so you'll understand the way that I am navigating through this thing called life, right? Um, so I guess like my background story. So I was formerly a scientist, right? I lived in Northern Virginia. So I had been in this profession for, I don't know, a good number of years, enough to know that this is not what I wanted to do. Um, so I was getting a little bit older. I was able to pay my way through school kind of, and I was like, well, I was funding it. So I said, maybe I should do this, but I wasn't quite sure yet. So I really love photography. I had already, taken classes in photography prior to my first career. So I had been, taking electives as photography like you guys are doing. Similar, it's a great skill to have. And, thinking about it as a career is a completely different thing, right? So I'd already tried something out. I was like, oh, I don't know if I want to do this. So I was like, how can I get to where I need to be? Um, so I started to kind of map things out and plan them out, much, I guess, like a scientist would, which I don't know. Some people are like more free flowing, but I was like, how am I going to problem solve this? Right. So I lived in Northern Virginia. Um, and I was kind of trying to think about, what art universities are in my state, right? Because I was going to be paying in-state tuition. Luckily, VCU is an amazing arts program. I was also familiar with it because my brother was there. So I had like a good understanding of Richmond and like what the art scene was like there. So I was like, okay, I'm going to get a job there and then I'm going to apply to art school. That was like my plan, right? So I got a job, which was working for the state lab, as you can see here in all these like terrible sad pictures. It was funny because I was going through old hard drives and trying to make this presentation, and there was like all these sad pictures of me like in the lab or just like making fun of other people in the lab, and I was like, why didn't I leave sooner? But anyway,
You have like
so
a
I
full
got
body of work here.
I know. But so I moved to Richmond, got the job. I ended up getting laid off from that job, but I was given an opportunity in the same building in a different lab. And that honestly, like if my boss hadn't given me that opportunity, I don't know that I would have been able to do career change, because I started working there and then I got into VCU and he was able to give me like a part-time job as I worked, like as I was in school. So I was, working simultaneously as I was in school. And, that's kind of unheard of with like full-time positions. So it was great. Anyway, okay, so I was in the lab. I was in Richmond, Virginia, and I was like, okay, how can I create a body of work, right? So like, how do I do this? I started to think about who could help me on my path, like who was in my network, like who did I know, right? Sometimes you think about this and it sounds very, um, I don't know, transactional, I guess you could say. But there are people out there that will help you, like the same way that, you would help others. And you'll find this like as you're getting, as you're graduating and you're looking for new opportunities, like this is the to approach, any sort of job search. Okay. So anyway, so who was in my network? Like who did I know, right? And then the next thing I just kind of did a who, what, where, when, how. Anyway, so then I had to think about, like what type of photography was my focus? What did I want out of photography, and like what path did I want to take in photography? So obviously you all are non-majors, so you don't really have like a clear defined path as say like an art student would be leaving like with a photography degree, because there's many avenues that you can take in photography. Like it doesn't just need to be commercial photographer, right? Like you could be a wedding photographer, you could be, you can work on set with like film production companies, you could be a digital technician, like working on set just approving shots for another photographer. You could be a retoucher. So I was kind of like, I always knew I was a portrait photographer. Like that's what I like to photograph was people. But, there's some photographers, especially when you're living in a smaller city, that will be an overall generalist, like doing all sorts of different types of photography, just kind of trying to make ends meet. But I always knew like portraiture is where my heart is. So that's the way that I, approached that. I was like, I'm going to take portraits for a living. I just need to figure out how to do that, right? So it was Richmond, because that's where the opportunities were for me at the time, right? Like I needed to go back to school. I needed to get my degree. That's how I was approaching it. You definitely don't need to have a photography degree to achieve great things. Like I have met so many interesting and compelling artists that aren't classically trained, but I was coming from it from a science perspective with no art history background, no lighting background, no nothing. And so for me to like change careers and then, get my master's degree would be like completely self-driven in my opinion. And I was looking for more of a place where I could be interacting with other creatives and actually learning the things that I needed to learn. Like, my background in art was like Van Gogh, everybody, you know what I mean? I needed that kind of like I needed more information for me to feel good about it. That's just how I was approaching it. And when is now, right? Like now is the time. So I started to build my work. And so I still think about this sometimes because, you have to have the 10,000 hours or whatever. So I started to build my work, and I started thinking about how I wanted to, present myself to the university, because I had to have a portfolio. I had to have something to show, and I didn't really have anything. I had taken darkroom classes when I was pursuing my biology degree, but it was like, who's going to want to see like a moody emo picture of some cigarettes in an ashtray? Like, you know what I mean? Like I needed to have like an actual like concentration of like what I was going to, present. So I started to think about like concepts. I started to outreach to people. Like that's like another thing too, depending on what type of photography you want to do, right? You got to like kind of seek out the type that you want. Since I was mostly concentrating on portraiture, if I saw somebody on social media or, if I've met somebody like out on the town, like I remember like early on just going up to people and being like, I love your look. Can we shoot? And they'd be like, okay, like who doesn't want free photos of themselves? Right. So being a little bold in my approach, I also started like learning from my mistakes because, I was so excited to learn. I feel like that's what's great about photography is like at the beginning, you just want to keep shooting, right? Like you're just like not jaded, like I am now maybe, or like, or not jaded, but like, you know what I'm saying? Like there's this like passion when you're first starting to learn something that is kind of unmatched, right? And you're learning from mistakes, you're trying new things. There's really low expectations. You're just having fun because, there isn't really, you're not doing it for money. You don't need it to survive per se, right? At this particular moment, right? At the very beginning. So for this presentation, I was starting to kind of look back on some of my work, and a lot of it is not good. But that's okay. And I thought, I'd show some of this work to y'all so you can see, when you're first starting, it's not always so great, but it's always kind of good in a bad way, right? Because you still see yourself in it.
This is amazing. So we get a chance to see the work that like will never be on your website, right? This is incredible.
I mean, there's a couple. Yeah, there's a couple. I was going to put some really bad stuff on there, and I was like, I don't want to start it off like that. But anyway, so you still see yourself in your old work. And sometimes when I am like feeling down, or when I'm trying to like get inspired about photography again, sometimes I will look back on my old work. And because, as a professional photographer that does this for a living, it can get easy to feel like imposter syndrome or whatever if you haven't gotten a gig in a minute, right? Because it's like freelance is like ebbs and flows. Like you're either working like your ass off, or it's like crickets for like a week or two. You know what I'm saying? So like, so sometimes looking back at old work and seeing like, how you've progressed makes you feel really great. But anyway, okay. So yeah, so let's get weird, right? So at the very beginning, I was just kind of like testing things out, right? I was like, oh, this would look great, these weird patterns, these colors. I didn't know anything about studio lighting whatsoever. So I was really concentrating on, what I had and how I could make it look the way I wanted it to look, right? So in this particular situation, I think I was using like I want to say it was like a living room lamp, and it had like it had like a dome just like over the light bulb that was like a little bit frosted. So it looks a lot like a softbox would in like studio lighting, or like a soft, an umbrella with like diffusion or something like that. But this was like purely like this lamp that I got from Target, So there were so many times where I was like, okay, how can I make this work? And so, for instance, this background here, lots of studio photographers will purchase these paper roll backdrops. And oftentimes they're like $100, and then plus shipping and all that stuff. B&H and like Amazon used to do free shipping, but they're so big and they're so wide and obnoxious that, the shipping, anyway, they're expensive. That's the bottom line. So I was like, okay, well, how can I get some backdrops? So I went to Michael's and like AC Moore, and they had these paper rolls that I guess like teachers use on their bulletin board. And I used that as my backdrop. So I started like kind of shooting portraits this way, just on the cheap, just, trying to get some reps in, trying to see what lighting was doing. I had no idea about lighting, like what hard light, what soft light was. I didn't know anything. I was just like trying shit. I just came up with, weirdo idea. And then there was this, there was this other stuff too. That
Fun.
I was like, I was experimenting with light, right? And so I was like using, just looking at this was so bad, but I still love like performance and clowns and things like that. And I'm actually doing a clown series anyway. But I was like really interested in shadow play. For this particular image, this is a digital image, but I shot it on film. So I actually, I couldn't find any of the images from my film shoot, but I remember like when I metered this, I had to use 3200 ISO. And so I had to special order this like black and white film that was like a 3200, like you couldn't get it easily. And I was, experimenting in low light and shooting in low light. So, just obviously had a concept and had a lot of technical things going on, right? But, trying things, right? So I think that's an important part of photography, is like never being afraid to try things. And just, coming up with concepts if you have them. Another thing that I would suggest if you're considering like having a relationship with your camera, because that's all, a lifetime with photography really is like, I have this camera, it's part of me now, right? Like how often am I going to see it? it's like it's really a relationship, because sometimes I'm just so fed up with it that I don't want to touch it. And then other times it's like bringing me so much joy, right? So taking your camera everywhere. So these two pictures, I think I was like on vacation with a friend and we were at her childhood home on the trampoline. And I had been experimenting using gelled flash. And I just brought it on vacation with me, and we were just jumping around and I just started taking pictures. And
Can
then
you
this
explain? Sorry to interrupt. Can you explain what gelled flash is, real quick?
Oh yeah, yeah. So I had an on-camera flash, and then I had they're like these colored filters that you can purchase like on Amazon or B&H or like any camera store, and basically it just colors the light from the flash. So I really liked color, and I was like, well, what can I do with it? It was funny because like looking back at these, I was like, yeah, I need to do that again. But I was like re-energized with that feeling again. But anyway, and then this photo, I think we were at me and my friend and a group of other people were at this photo festival in Charlottesville that they used to have called Look 3. And we rented this Airbnb, and I just took a photo of him in the Airbnb with like a green flash. But anyway, okay. So again, experimenting with friends, right? Also, another tip, if you're thinking about being a portrait photographer, I will say that most of this presentation is kind of geared towards a portrait photographer, but if you're exploring it in different ways, hopefully you'll still be able to pick up some things that'll be helpful to you. If you're interested in portrait photography and you're trying to get a portfolio, find a friend that loves looking at themselves, because that's what I would do. Is like my friend Talia, she loved makeup and she loved looking at herself in the mirror and taking selfies, and she knew how her face moved. And if you can't find somebody that like enjoys their image, I'd say like find somebody that's very confident with themselves, because trying to get a very natural image from someone takes some work and some skill. So if you're just starting, I would say if you're into portrait photography, like think about, who can I get that's very charismatic and is comfortable with having their picture taken? So Talia was great. She loved having her picture taken. She had tons of clothes. She loved doing makeup. I didn't have to hire a makeup artist or a stylist or anything. I was already kind of thinking that I was going in more the fashion or like portrait route. So this was like a perfect person to use as a subject, because it was very easy to get her expression to be natural, and she always looked good, right? So, experimenting with friends, like depending on like, what your trust level is at, and how weird you can get, right? And like always taking your camera everywhere. I think that can be said about any photography, like taking your camera everywhere, because you never know when there's going to be a good photo op. Even if it's your iPhone, although it's golf, I don't know, maybe you should be taking your real camera, but it's always a good thing to take your camera everywhere. Okay. So I was taking pictures of my friends, trying to get into art school, developing work, and I was like, all right, this isn't enough. I can't show these pictures in my portfolio. So I was like, okay, well, I'm going to take some more classes in my local arts community. So I took some classes at my local visual arts center. I took a darkroom class. I'd already taken darkroom before. Like I knew how to use a darkroom in, high school, college, whatever, but I just wanted to get back in there and kind of hone in on my technical skills, because shooting film, obviously you don't have an LCD screen on the back of your camera telling you how well the picture looks, right? So you get better technically. I also took a digital photography class at the VMFA at the Virginia Museum of Fine Arts, where I'm currently teaching. So full circle moment. Yeah. Anyway, and then I also took a studio lighting course at a community college in town. So I was kind of like dabbling in a bunch of different things, trying to figure out what I wanted to do, trying to get my portfolio ready for VCO Arts. And I continued to experiment with friends, right? Or anybody that would let me take my photo. I'm pretty sure that this particular image was in my portfolio when I went to VCU. Um, so, I always loved bright colors. I always loved working with like singular subjects. I always loved the set design or like styling aspects of shoots, like the creativity. Like, I feel like sometimes I approach photography like a painting, like making a painting. Um, so I think a lot of these things, going back to them, it's like looking at it and I'm like, yeah, that makes sense. Like this is the kind of art that I was aspiring to put out there, right? So I got into VCU Arts and I was like, great, I'm like this super old student coming back to school. I was a good 10 years older than the freshmen that were going to school. So it was it was challenging. It was difficult, but I loved it. I was learning a lot and I was taking it seriously, right? Like I wasn't going to frat parties every night and partying. Like I was really taking this seriously because I really wanted it and because I was funding it, So I was a nerd. I was a huge nerd. But I really enjoyed it. And the reason that I decided to go the art route, like I said, is because of the background and because of all the different skills that I learned, right? Like I was taking sculpture classes. I took, I'm trying to think what else, textile classes. I learned all these, different things that I would never have learned. And sometimes I apply them to my own artwork. So it comes around. But anyway, so I got into VCU Arts and I started thinking about, like, once I was in, I was like, okay, school is good and whatever, but I need to figure out like how I'm gonna move or keep going after school, or like, who am I gonna meet? Where am I going? I knew that I wanted to shoot fashion. That was just like one of the things that I was like inspired by. I was like always like model photography for some reason. Maybe it's because it's more collaborative and it's also very creative, right? Like there's always like some sort of concept. There's a location. There's a hair and makeup stylist, a wardrobe stylist. There's always like so many people going into it, sharing their art together and having it all come together in the end. And I was really drawn to that. So I started to think about, who in my network at VCU would be a good person to meet, or, what organizations were out there that needed somebody like me, like needed my photography skills. Like maybe there was like a fashion organization, which there was. I also used to, on Instagram or Facebook, maybe just Instagram, but on Instagram, I'd put, looking for, I don't know, this type of model for shoot, blah, 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 just to get out there and shoot. So I was kind of harnessing my network, kind of like trying to figure out, who I could meet and like what kind of creative teams I could be a part of, where we'd all be kind of working together to make really nice work.
And this is on top of your like coursework, right? Like you're in school and all this is happening in addition to being in school.
Yes.
Oh.
Yeah. I told you and I was working. I told you I was a nerd, and not only a nerd, but like I just really love it. I really love, when you really love something and you just don't want to stop doing it, kind of like that. And I was just, I was getting older and I know that my time is ticking away. And so that's kind of what was pushing me through it. And so here's some more bad images, right? Okay, so I was part of this like fashion organization at the time, was called River City Fashion Uprising. It's like the worst name ever. I should have just said it River City Fashion. I feel like that would have made sense. But anyway, but they would, they had a website. We would book shoots. Everyone was kind of, either in the fashion design department or wanted to be part of production. Like there was like student makeup artists. There was like models that would volunteer for these shoot. I think for this particular shoot, we actually had approached a boutique in town and asked to shoot their swimwear. And I think in exchange, they got to use the images. I'm not sure. I don't remember. But looking back at that now, I'm like, man, I would never do that again. But, you know, sometimes working for free, you're like...
Wait. Why would you never do it again? I'm just curious.
Okay. So, you know, obviously when you're working with a company to produce a free imagery, they're making a profit off of that, right? Like, so they're making money. If you put these images, I mean, these are terrible images, but if you put these images out there and they want to sell that swimsuit, you know, maybe they sell some of those swimsuits with your images, right? And so you got to think about that from a commercial standpoint. Like, it hurts the photo community when you're not adequately pricing yourself. I will say, you know, of course, I still work for free on occasion if I feel like it'll build my portfolio, or if I'm creating like a test shoot, which is completely different, where there's no money being made. It's just everyone working, which I'm going to get to later, everyone working together to just make work for future work, basically. But in this scenario, this was more of like a commercial business store. So, you know, thinking about that, like if you're shooting something, like don't do it for free. Just do it for like, you know, even if it has to be $50, right? You always want to do it for something, unless you find that you're gaining value out of it somehow, and it's going to help you in the future to get future business. Then that's the only time that I'd say, you know. Anyway, so yeah, so some swimsuit images for that fashion blog. They wrote a little article about this. And then we started coming up with concepts. We started coming up with concepts in that fashion club, and they'd pitch stories and be like, who wants to shoot this? Who wants to be in it? Who wants to model? Who wants to do makeup? So for this particular shoot, it was a friend of mine actually that was styling it. She owns her own vintage company business. Her own vintage clothing business, mostly online, and her name is Nighthawks Vintage. But anyway, she wanted to style the shoot. She also wanted to promote her brand. It was a student organization. There was like low expectations. We could have a lot of fun. So we went to the VCU library and we shot some images. I don't know if I was allowed to do this, but you know, always, what is the phrase? Don't ask permission, ask for forgiveness.
Nice.
Definitely agree with that, especially if you're trying to get risque with the way that you shoot. Because the minute that you ask for permission, most of the time, it's like, why give anyone the opportunity to say no, right? So anyway, so we shot these in the VCU library. I think I had like just an on-camera flash or off-camera flash, sorry. And I think at the time I was also in studio lighting. So I had some idea about how to balance my flash with the ambient light. So the ambient light is a light that's like actually existing in the library, right? So if I had taken this photo, for instance, with a faster shutter speed, this would be looking more like paparazzi style. Like this would be black, and maybe she would just be with the flash, right? So I was using some of those skills I had learned in studio lighting to kind of like work on this shoot. And actually looking back on these, I'm like, these aren't bad, right? But anyway, so yeah, so coming up with a concept, working with a team, we had a makeup artist, we had a stylist. I don't think anybody did hair, but we had 2 locations too. This was just one of them. So like, it was great. It was like a full Saturday of shooting. You know, I was working at the lab a couple of days a week, going to school, and then shooting this on a Saturday. And I was like, wow, I feel so alive, right? It was great. Then I was thinking about, you know, other ways that I could get into fashion in my community. So there's something that comes through town called RVA Fashion Week, which is like a Richmond Fashion Week, kind of like New York. Obviously doesn't have the critical acclaim as like the bigger cities, but you know, we still do the thing. It's a great networking opportunity. For the most part, it's like everyone's kind of volunteering their services. Like, you pay to get in, but like the fashion designers, the makeup artists, the hairstylists, the photographers, the hosts, even, I think like everyone's just doing it to network and to get to know people and to just say like, hey, I'm here, I'm a photographer, or I'm a fashion designer, right? And it's a great way to just meet people that like to do what you like to do. And so I got involved with that. And I still worked with them up until I want to say 2021 was the last time. But then it just, so many photographers started doing it. So I was like, all right, I'm taking a step back here. But anyway, but yeah, so, if you want to shoot runway, or if you're interested in something, right? Like trying to find the different ways that can get you there, right? So thinking about that, right? Especially I was coming at it from, I don't have as much time as, say, Sally over here, that's 20, right? So it was like, I gotta hustle a little bit, I gotta get my shit together. So I was trying to think about how I could do that in my city, because I wasn't in New York, I wasn't in LA, wasn't in a bigger city. Then I started to think about, how am I going to develop my style, right? Because everyone can take these photos, right? These are like regular runway photos, like whatever. How are you going to, I guess, distinguish yourself from everybody else that's taking photos, right? And like also, what are you trying to communicate? So these two pictures, like this one was taken in my house, again, with the craft rolls that I got from AC Moore or Michaels. It was the same thing, $7. I made these out of construction paper. I had my friend dress up in a green dress, and I kind of told her what to do. That's usually how it goes. But anyway, I knew that I liked bright colors, like that was always something that was like really consistent in my work. This particular image I took in the studio lighting class that I took at a community college prior to getting into VCU. And for this one, I was looking at a lot of work, and there was a German photographer that shot a lot of still life imagery. And I wish I could have like found him before this, but I really liked his use of color, and I really liked his use of like very soft, even light. So I remember coming into this class and kind of showing my professor and being like, I want to do this. And this is the cup that I brought. And I had super glued all these Skittles together. So it looked like a puddle. I think there's like cardboard under here. But anyway, so I already knew that I liked color. I already knew that it was like a little bit whimsical, that I like to do kind of like escapism, or I don't know, just like a different world situation feeling. So that was already kind of like developing. But, as you develop your work, maybe thinking about, what you enjoy shooting, because as you experiment, you're going to figure out like what you like, what you don't like, right? If you keep shooting, you'll figure that out. You'll lean towards something. There'll just be more pictures of that thing, right? And so, looking at a lot of photo books or going to gallery shows, seeing other people's work that could inspire you, similar to like how I was inspired by that one photographer. Visiting artist websites, or, Instagram obviously is always great. Pinterest also is good. But yeah, just looking at a lot of work and trying to think about like what you're trying to communicate and how you're going to communicate it, right? So while I was in school, it's funny because Dana knows Janelle, who was one of my professors as well. And at the time, she was encouraging us to apply for the VMFA fellowship. So I'm going
to just interrupt real quick. Can you just explain what the VMFA fellowship is real quick?
Sure, yeah. So there's a museum in town, and they give people a fellowship award if you, I guess, like submit work and they like your work. It's kind of like an open call for different artist mediums. So there'll be one for painting, there'll be one for photography, there will be one for ceramics. And you submit like, you know, a body of work, and then there's jurors, and they decide, you know, who's going to get it this year, basically. And you get, it was like $4,000, which as a student, I was like, this is great. I'm just going to put it towards my tuition. But anyway, so I was in one of Dana's colleagues' class, Janelle. She was teaching, I think the class was called Concepts. So it was like about coming up with a concept in your photography, like conceptual photography. And she had suggested to a lot of us that we should apply for the VMFA fellowship. Or maybe she required it. I can't remember. But anyway, I applied like kind of on a whim, and I just didn't know what to submit. And I just submitted some images that I had taken like while I was in school. I ended up getting it. So I was like, okay, it's kind of weird how that happens sometimes, because, you know, there'll be times where you invest a lot of time and energy into an application, like any sort of application, job application, you know, art open call application, and there'll be so much time devoted and you'll never hear back. And then I can't tell you how many times that I've just been like, maybe I'll just apply to this, and I'll get it. And I'm just like, how is this so weird? It's like, sometimes you just got to put your art out there, and, you know, depending on who's watching, like, it's really so subjective. So I always say, like, put your work out there, show your work, right? Like, that's so important. Just show your work, even if it's shitty. You get into the practice of, you know, putting your application together, right? So that's a lot of it, is like talking about your work, right? Having an artist statement, having a body of work, right? Like thinking about more intentionally about what you're photographing and what you're trying to communicate, right? So all those things are so important, like as you progress as a photographer, or as you decide to be, you know, focus on photography, even if it's just a hobby, right? Like if you're deciding, oh, you know what, I'm going to be a landscape photographer, and maybe I'm going to put this out in my local, you know, open call for this gallery in town. Nothing that goes bad with that, right? Because you can meet people in an opening, you get to share, you know, like, you know, you need to share your work, right? Because artwork is part of your soul, and it needs to be proliferated out into the world. But yeah, so I put that in there because I was like, I remember this, like I did not try. And I was like, okay, maybe I should try a little bit more. Maybe I should be a little bit more intentional about, you know, how I'm sharing my work, because somebody saw something there, right? So maybe I should believe in it a little bit more too. Okay, so school, right? I'm in school, I'm doing all these things. And then I was like, okay, how can I get some real world experience here, right? And I feel like we're almost running out of time. We need to go a little bit faster. Okay, so I got an internship with Richmond Magazine, which is a local magazine in town. I was like, I need to like be part of a magazine, or I need to do something, right? So I got this internship with Richmond Magazine, and they would send me on assignment. Like I was their freelance photographer or their staff photographer, and they'd be like, hey, we need a portrait of this guy. He has a huge beard. It's about beards. It was like Movember or something like that. And I was like, okay. And so I was just like going out and, you know, trying things. And since I wasn't getting paid, it was kind of like lower stress because I was an intern, right? Like I think I said that I needed school credit, but then I never submitted the form because I just wanted the internship, and I didn't want anything to be negative against it. And I didn't want them to be like, wait, you just want to work here for free? Okay, that's weird. So I just said like, oh yeah, it's for credit, but I didn't need the credit. But anyway, so I got, you know, sent on assignment to take photographs of people in the city. And there was a lot of bad images. Like these are actually the two like pretty good ones. There's a lot of bad imagery out there. Lots of times for the interns, I actually think that these photos are from when I was actually freelancing for them. But a lot of the photos that I was assigned to when I was an intern were like this size or even smaller. So they knew that, you know, you were working with interns, but they were still giving you the opportunity to shoot, but your images weren't huge. Like there wouldn't be like a full page like this one is. So this is a little bit misleading, but anyway, I got an internship working at Richmond Magazine, and I found it very useful because in these situations, lighting had always been very controlled, right? But when I was here, I was troubleshooting light like crazy. And so this is one of the things that I valued a lot about my internship at Richmond Magazine was that I never knew where I was shooting. I knew who I was shooting. I never knew what the light was going to be like where I was shooting. So I always had to kind of like work on my toes a lot and make a lot of mistakes, right? Lots of mistakes. But that's why there's Photoshop and Lightroom. Just kidding. But making lots of mistakes early on. I also at this time was finding photographers in my area who I could assist. So there are lots of photographers in my area, but I was kind of looking for photographers that were doing what I wanted to do. So I was like, why am I going to assist this wedding person if it's not going to help me out in the long run, right? So I was like quickly kind of thinking about doing my Google searches, looking at work, looking at magazines in town, like local magazines, or looking at people that shot some campaigns that were working with the Martin Agency, which is a advertising agency in town. And I was looking at the photographers, right? Like I was doing my research. I was a little bit like methodical about all this. So I found some photographers. This is Todd Wright, who were kind of shooting more fashion, shooting more editorial, kind of like working with creative teams, also shooting ad campaigns. And this lady, her name's Sarah Whaler, she used to shoot for Richmond Magazine. So before then, I was an intern, right? So I was like on set just with her and like Richmond Magazine. And seeing how she would shoot something like an editorial for them as a freelancer, right? Because I was just shooting whatever they sent me to shoot, and I didn't have all the fancy lights. I didn't know about any of this stuff. So I was like, I need to assist a photographer who's doing what I want to do so I can kind of get a handle of how this like machine works, right? I also started to reach out to photographers in larger cities. So this is Matt Licari. He's a fashion and celebrity photographer. He lived in Richmond about 15 years ago, and he had assisted Todd. And I really loved his work. He used to shoot for Richmond Magazine. So I was like, all right, I could see like, maybe if I moved to a bigger city, I was like, this could be me. Like, how could I? So I kept emailing him and bugging him all the time, being like, what do you think about this? And he was always really great about it. He was a really great early mentor for me. This was a test shoot. So a lot of studio photographers, studio fashion photographers will, like I said, collaborate with a lot of people, right? And so like if you're slow or if you just want to put like more edgy work out there or something different out there, you do test shoots, right? Because sometimes these test shoots that you're working on creatively with a bunch of other people, if it has a cool concept and cool wardrobe and cool makeup and hair, it will often lead to different work, right? Like more work, because people see that and they're like, wow, I love that. Can you do that for us? Or can you do it this way? Or, you know what I mean? So, testing as a photographer is definitely important. I definitely still do that. I did mention, not working for free. This is working for free. However, you are getting value out of this because everyone's working together. Nothing's being sold, right? The only thing that you're selling is yourself and your skills. Like everyone, right? Hair, makeup, wardrobe, photographer. Anyway, so he was based in New York, and I went up there a few times. I actually assisted him on a Nicole Miller shoot, which is a fashion designer. So went up there, a few times to assist him, and we still keep in touch sometimes when I have questions about pricing or something like that. He's always like a great resource. Anyway, okay, yeah. So I also did some on location assisting. So obviously controlled light in these situations. But this was more like variable light, trying to figure this out. I thought this picture was great because it was like a terrible morning. I think this was like 5 a.m, and we got up super early because we were trying to simulate a sunset, right? But we couldn't work during the sunset because we had an entire day of shooting. right? So we had to try to make it look like sunset. And how do you do that? You do it at sunrise, but it was cloudy. Anyway, so we're looking, and here, I think this was a shoot at a bank, and we were taking architectural photos of Town Bank, and this is just like a busy street in Richmond. So here's the photographer. He's looking at his computer that's tethered to his camera, right? And I was here. I built this scrim out here, which is like a light diffuser. It diffuses light, softens light. And I think maybe we were taking a portrait in front of the building. So kind of like architectural portrait. I don't know. Anyway. Okay, yeah. So kept assisting Todd. These are all Todd's shoots. This was for Jack Daniels. And look, like, I just feel like this is so ridiculous. Like, there's so many assistants here, and we're just holding like black cards. It's ridiculous. He was getting like a close-up of this guy's hand and the Jack Daniels bottle. This one was for Colonial Williamsburg. So this was just like an ad campaign for Virginia tourism, as like Virginia's for Lovers campaign. And I thought this was cool because it kind of shows like how he lit it. So he had a couple of reflector heads like bouncing off the ceiling to get kind of like a softer light, because when you bounce light off of a white surface, it becomes soft and it comes crashing down on these girls. And then there was like a light out here too that was kind of creating like a little sunlight patch, like kind of simulating like a sunbeam. And the camera was over here, and there was like two little girls, and they had like dolls from the gift shop or something like that from Colonial Williamsburg. But yeah, so, assisting, always a great thing. Getting real world experience, right? Like if you're thinking about changing careers into photography, or thinking about it like, pursuing it in a certain way, just thinking about the steps that you need to get there. Of course, you can do this a lot quicker than I did, right? But like just thinking about how you can do what you want to do, or and what you need to do to get there, I think is important. Okay, so making money. So I, starting to think about like, who is my market? Who's going to hire me? Maybe sometimes taking some jobs that might not be exactly what you want to pay the bills, right? So I will say I do shoot events at times, but I'm a portrait photographer, so it works out, right? Like taking candidates of people at a corporate event or a pool party. I did a pool party for a tennis club once. Can end up being kind of fun, right? Because it's still like everyone's having fun. You make it look the way you want to look, based on how you shoot it, right? And then, maybe as a non-major, you won't. Maybe you will. Who knows? If you'll switch to photography like I did. But there's lots of ebbs and flows in freelancing, right? Like some days, some months you feel like you're so rich, and then some months you're like, wow, I worked 4 times, So there's definitely like ebbs and flows to freelancing, especially as you're first starting out, as you're trying to figure out how to navigate the business world, which, coming from an art background, was something that they didn't concentrate too much, because I think the school that I was in was more focused on how to make you an artist, right? Like how to sell yourself in the gallery world, I guess. So a little bit different. But anyway, and another thing I will say is like selling yourself. It's like how to leverage a service to a client that ends up solving a problem. So some clients that I have, right, like I take their pictures and I'm like, all right, how do I get this person to be a steady client? I sell them another service, right? So I think about, lately I've been thinking about like social media content. I'm like, how can I deliver cheap, like inexpensive social media content that still has value to it, that still looks quality? And so it's like, then you just start to think about how you can break down what you provide and make it cheaper, right? Maybe you do it quicker. Maybe you don't edit as much. Maybe, you don't use a real model, you use an employee, stuff like that, right? So how can you solve a problem for someone with photography? So, one of the ways that I make some money sometimes is doing these really boring headshots, right? Super boring. But I will say that, getting natural expression from someone is not always so easy. So I use this as a chance to connect with a person, right? And like, that's what I like most about photography, is connecting with someone that I wouldn't normally talk to, right? So I get to chat to a person that I would never meet. Like, these were real estate agents. These were lawyers, corporate lawyers, never would meet, never would talk to. And I get to like kind of talk about their life a little bit, and I loosen them up, and then we get some nice natural expressions, right? Because a lot of photography is a little bit psychology, right? Like, how can you get into this person's mind? It's all about trust. How can they trust you? You can tell good photographers from bad photographers just based on how that picture makes you feel, right? And so if you can get like a natural expression that looks genuine, that's always great. So yeah, more boring imagery, right? Do some branding sessions for this consulting guy. Recently I did this shoot for this dietitian, rich lady, lives in Richmond, is a nutritionist, has a beautiful house, beautiful lady, right? She had a hair and makeup team. So this was kind of fun because I was kind of trying to figure out like how to light everything on the fly. And I think I did a pretty good job, which I was kind of surprised about because I had no idea how I was going to light this like when I walked in there, right? But I was able to kind of troubleshoot pretty quickly. So that's what's great about, having freelance work, is like, you never know what kind of situation you're going to be in, and you're constantly getting better. You're constantly like taking those swings. So Richmond Magazine. So internships can turn into paid work. So here's 3 of my covers for Richmond Magazine. I feel like all of these are kind of terrible. Like I'm not particularly proud of this image or this image or this image, really. This one's okay. But I'm getting that practice in, right? So Richmond Magazine has been great because I've been interning with them and now I freelance for them. And so if there's ever a cool assignment, sometimes I will have some really nice images that I'm proud of that I can put on my website, or that I can put on my social media that can like promote more work, right? And what's great about working with them is like there's always a story involved, and I'm always meeting people on my community, right? So that's always good, right? Like expanding your network, connecting with people, just talking to people, right? Like this, I think this was about a Labrador rescue. This one was about this guy that owns a concert venue in town called the Broadberry. And this is a painting and printmaking studio in town. I actually know everybody here, Studio 23. So they do like Rizzo printing, they do wood block, letterpress, they do all sorts of stuff. Great nonprofit, and just great place to be. Anyway, so yeah, meeting people in my community, getting to shoot, getting that practice in. Maybe not all of them look so great, but I had like 20 minutes with this guy. It was dark in there. I don't know. Anyways, getting that practice in. So I started thinking about, do we only have 2 minutes left?
Okay. Yeah, we're really tight on time.
All right, sorry. Okay, so I started thinking about how I could merge my creativity with business clients. So I started kind of seeking out people that needed creative content that I could art direct or have an art director on set. For this particular shoot, I had an art director that I was working with, who was just a kid. He was like a recent grad that had graduated from photo, actually. So I shot these. It was kind of his idea. I did a lot of the lighting, and we worked together to kind of get this concept off the ground, right? So thinking about that, like how can I stop doing this and start doing more things that I enjoy doing, that I want my work to go. So this was another jeweler that gave me that opportunity, a clothing company as well recently, that I've been working with, to sell, their accessories and clothing brands. And then a thing I will say is to always continue to create personal work. So all of these shoots were personal work. This was my friend in a pond in, I want to say Pennsylvania. They had a lake house or something. And it's not Pennsylvania, that's landlocked. I don't know where it was. Anyway. But yeah, so always like continue to create personal work, to put your work out there, right? To create the things that you want to be creating, because when people see that, they know that you're capable of it, and then they understand that you can make an idea come to life, right? So anyway, like I said, continuing to experiment and test. This was a recent shoot that I did with a wardrobe stylist out of DC, and a prop stylist, food stylist, makeup artist, hair person, all in my studio. And I was kind of like experimenting with colored light gels, kind of like I said earlier with the flash, but with studio strips. And yeah, that's it. Thank you. Right at 9:30.
Yeah, I was hit on the dot. That's amazing. I don't want to, Luke and Alex, I don't want to hold you too long, but if you had questions for Monica, that was amazing, by the way, to go from like start to where you are now. You made it so accessible, and I really like the way you sort of like broke it down, like outline form, like this is the problem, these are the steps. That was awesome. It applies like,
I was like, how should I do this? I don't know.
Yeah.
But anyway, yeah, if you all have any questions, and maybe it may not apply to you, who knows, but if you have any questions.
Yeah, I think that like this stuff applies, like the way that you presented it, like it applies, your strategy applies like to every field, not just photography. But anyways, Luke, Alex, any questions for Monica while we have her?
I have a question, like how you do your photo shoots. Like, are you the main person that thinks of the ideas, or does your client come to you and has like an idea for like a scene, or like is it kind of like a mix between you two?
So that's a really good question. So I'd say for personal work, I come up with a lot of the concept, and some of my test shoots as well. So if I'm working with a model for a modeling agency and doing a test shoot, I've said like, hey, I would like to test with this person. And so what a test means is like you get the model for free. Basically, you don't have to pay them anything, and you can shoot with them however they want. Of course, you still want to provide imagery that the modeling agency can have. So that means like, headshots, them in jeans and a t-shirt, stuff like that. But then you can do something weird if you want. So I'd say for my test shoots, for the most part, a lot of the concept is me. Although lately I've been working with a few stylists that have had like that last wardrobe shoot that I did with the colored light. Let's see if I can pull it up. This was the wardrobe stylist's concept, and she was loosely basing it off of Miles Aldridge, who's a fashion photographer, a British fashion photographer, who has lots of let's see if I can look this up. Lots of women and like kind of bored, helpless, or just domestic, sad kind of. So we were kind of like vibing off of that. We also really enjoyed how he used light, like colored light. He did like the bouncing. So we were, kind of vibing off of that. She gave me a loose mood board, and then I thought about the lighting and stuff. So for the most part, yeah, if I'm doing a personal thing, I would say it's either me or somebody else on the creative team that's coming up with that. And so for the client, for the jewelry client, I actually had, I worked with an art director who's just a person. He's not classically trained as an art director. He was just a photographer, artist person. And he pitched an idea to the jewelers. And I had been working with them. They're kind of a steady client. And they're like, hey, we got this idea from this kid. Do you want to do it? And I was like, yeah, sure. And so we kind of worked together to come up with that concept. Like I did a little bit of the lighting. He did a little bit of the art direction. But for the other, I think I had 2 jewelry clients on there. For this one, I came up with this concept. I had this beautiful textured background. Yeah, and so it really just depends. Like, it just depends, who you're talking to, how you're doing it. A lot of these businesses are small businesses. I haven't gotten to the level where I'm shooting like ad campaigns or anything like that. Um, so, a lot of the time, uh, a lot of the time, uh, there will be a little bit more flexibility in the art direction, right? Like as you start shooting ad campaigns and things like that, like the people that I was assisting that I aspired to be, um, they have clear definitions about how the shoot's going to go, right? Like there is an art director on set, they're approving the shots and they're making those decisions. It's a little bit less flexible unless they've hired you to do art direction, right? So if you're on a bigger set, there'll be somebody doing props, there'll be somebody doing set design, there'll be somebody doing lighting. Like everyone has a role, right? So yeah, for my test shoots, I'd say more than half of the time it's usually my concept. But lately I've been like more lax about it. I'm like, all right, I'll do this, and then I just add a little flavor to it, right? So it really just depends.
That's an awesome question, Luke. Thank you.
Yeah, that's great.
Alex, I got your comment. So that's awesome. I had a quick question. So early on, when you're still sort of in the like, I'm using friends for everything kind of, and we're all just sort of doing this because we love it. What was the value exchange for them? Was it just the images, or did you like buy lunches, pizza for everybody? Like, how did you sort of help sweeten the deal, I guess, at that level, at that like entry level?
How did I sweeten the deal? I don't know. I feel like a lot of times just asking people who would say yes. I wouldn't ever have to really sweeten the deal. They would get pictures out of it. And so half the time they were happy with that. They would look at my work. I definitely got some people that were like, okay, and then I'd never hear from them again. But, I got more yeses than nos. So yeah, I wouldn't, if I had to sweeten the deal, I knew that that person didn't really want their photograph taken, and then maybe I wouldn't get as natural as an expression early on. So, yeah, half the time I would just ask. I think that's just like a good takeaway is just ask. The worst they could say is no, right?
Yeah, that's incredible. Cool. We are past time now. Luke, any final questions before we let Monica go?
Yeah, I'm good. Thank you. That's really good.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Monica. Luke and Alex, thank you for joining us. And yeah, Monica, I will talk to you later. Thank you. That was so awesome.
Okay, great.
If you want to see Luke or Alex, if you want to see more of Monica's contemporary works, the website is linked in class. So check it out.
Thank you.
Cool.
Oh, thank you.
See everyone later.
Bye.
Take care, everyone. Bye, Monica. Thank you again. That was awesome.
Bye. Thank you.
See ya.
Bye.